Alrighty, it's 2. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Awesome. This is our first meetup of the year. I've got a bunch more to post. Got some more broad terms too coming up around like rapid development practices and like CI, CD for your own life, I guess is how he's going to put it. So that's kind of a new topic. But today we've got Andrew Evans back. I think this is your 4th or 5th meetup. And this one's actually going to be recurring. So if you learn something today or want to try something new that Andrew's going to cover and then get stuck or like this saved my life or I need to talk about it more, this is going to we're going to do basically the same thing, maybe some updates here and there, but come back and we'd love to hear from you. So got a bunch of people. Hello, everyone. Yeah, a good mix of like experience as everyone's signing up. Thanks for letting me know how much experience you have with React testing. I'm definitely on the beginner side. But yeah, so before Andrew takes it away, we're gonna cover unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and then production tests, which is a bit of my interjection. And yeah, in this meetup's brought to you by LogRocket, and that's kind of what I mean with production testing. I know end-to-end tests like can be in production, but basically, yeah, LogRocket, and the way I use it every day is kind of once something is released, like a new component, an entire new app, our tests will help us identify issues as we're in development and then rolling stuff out. Want to have that going, but like I deal with a lot of like just chaos in production in terms of just like really high volumes of users. So what LogRocket really enables is a lot of the same practices we're going to learn about with React testing, but just for every single person. So what LogRocket is just a front-end performance monitoring solution, helps you identify and solve issues a lot more quickly in your React applications. So, say your test pass, all your tests pass at every stage of development, you release it, your production tests are passing. What LogRocket will then say is like, some person using Opera 2 web browser, your entire React app is still crashing. Like it tracks front-end performance metrics like CPU usage, memory usage, component render time, and then a lot of the cool product analytics stuff. Then we also integrate with all the backend stuff. So next month, I'm actually going to go through a lot more in depth what I'm talking about. But for now, Andrew, take it away.
All right, cool. Okay, can you hold on? I'll share my screen. There we go. All right, desktop 1. I think that's correct. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, let me close this. Close the Zoom. Oops. Close the various windows that are popping up here. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Andrew Evans. Just like Luke said, we're going to talk about React testing today. And basically, what we're going to cover, I have like a personal blog, and out here I've blogged. But this blog entry kind of covers most of what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to share the link at the end. But just to let you know, and then the other thing is that I also have a sample application, which I did not have here. It's out on GitHub. I'll also provide that link, which is what the sample application is how I'm going to walk through all this today. The other thing that's fun is the sample application is a local version of an actual running app. So if you wanted to have fun, go check out jessechowchow.com. And you can like register. It's with AWS's Amplify service and a bunch of other stuff, but it's basically a meal planning app is what it is. And this was just like a fun little toy project that I did a while back, and I took it all the way, and I have it hosted now. So, okay. So let's start talking about React testing. So React testing, today I'm basically going to talk about some kind of conceptual patterns and the reasons why tests are important. And then I'm going to talk about like essentially how you would write a test. And then I'm going to talk about how you can write a test with React. React is not that much different than other like technologies or any type of like testing, I guess. You just have to know the right tools to use. Just a little bit about me. I'm a manager at CapTech Consulting. I've been in the full stack for about 10 years, and I have master's degrees from Christopher Newport and William and Mary. And these are my wife and my cats. So, All right. So why is testing important? Okay, so testing is important because tests basically document, by like de facto document the features of your product. So what that means is that, you know, as you're writing tests, you're actually testing functionality, which then doubles as a way for you to understand what your app actually does. It also helps to enforce clean code practices. And the reason that this is the case is because as you write your tests, you're looking at your source code, you're exercising, you know, your source code, and you're basically doing a review of your code, even though you don't necessarily realize it. So things like redundancy, things that like at my current client, we use Cypress for a lot of our tests, but basically we were writing some Cypress tests and we ran into a situation where we had a very similar kind of like parent to child component set up. And basically we realized that we were doing it differently at different parts of the app. And all of that was surfaced by just testing. So that's what, you know, you'll see this as I start to show you code. When you make changes to your project, everybody has, you know, like you usually will start with a greenfield project, but then eventually you're going to be maintaining it, right? And so testing allows you to basically make sure that new things that you do don't break things that you used to do. So it makes changes very easy because you can validate things really, really quickly. The alternative to this would be manually testing everything, which is can be cumbersome and depending on the project can take like days. There are lots of tools with React. So Cypress.io, like I mentioned, is a great one for end-to-end. Most people talk about Jest, and I'm actually going to be referring to the testing recipes in the official React documentation, which points to Jest for writing tests. And there's also the React testing library, which is basically helper methods that work with Jest. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm basically going to cover testing with Jest and then also testing with Cypress. And then the other thing is too, there's categories of tests. So in a little bit, I'll kind of like break that down a little bit more. So the way that you write a test, normally like any test, is that you follow a pattern that is arrange, act, assert. It's very simple to remember because they're all A's. Basically, arrange refers to setting up the test. So this means like setting your data up, maybe creating like a mock value or something like that. Act is when you're actually exercising the code. So you're taking that data that you set up, you're running code against that. And then assert is you're checking to see if the result is what you're expecting. So if you follow this kind of like pattern, like I said, this is kind of a blanket for any technology. You can use the same kind of pattern. With React specifically, we're going to be talking about it with Jest and Cypress. That's what I was talking about. So here's a sample test. Let me see if I can make this big view slideshow. There we go. Okay, cool. So in the sample test here, you see I have arrange, act, and assert, which is what I was just saying, you know, a second ago. What I'm doing here is I'm creating basically a div element. So that's in the arrange. In the act, I'm actually trying to render that div element. And then the assert is once it's rendered, I'm trying to make sure that it has the title Chessy Chow Chow. So what you have here is basically the same pattern that you'll see in most like testing libraries or like talks that you go to, or like really any use case that you can think of with like, you know, a project that needs tests. And then this is super simple because obviously this app, there's not a whole lot to it, but you can imagine that if it's more complicated, there would be more to set up. There would obviously be more things to test. And I'm going to also talk about that a little bit more. So we talked about different types of tests and categories of tests. So unit tests at a high level, basically your tests that test your code. You can think of this as something that is just trying to exercise like a function or a method. And basically you're just trying to prove that your code actually, you know, kind of does what you're expecting it to do without necessarily fleshing out like, you know, a huge data set or something like that. You're just doing some like happy path tests, which is basically like what you would expect. And then you might have like a sad path test where you're basically testing something that's broken or what you would expect to be broken. So right here, this is the same screenshot I had a second ago. And as you can see, you're basically, that's all we're doing here is I mean, I guess you could say we created a div element. So there's like some data, but there's really no data to this. And so basically this is what I would consider a unit test, because you're basically just validating that the React function that you're rendering is, showing what it's supposed to. Integration tests are a different category of tests that basically see how your project interacts with other like APIs, or even if you have like a distributed system or something like that, it might be like the way that different pieces of the system interact. That can all be under the category of integration tests. The example that I'm showing you here is so simple. Like all I'm doing is I'm using like local storage for the data, and like there's nothing to it. But basically, like if you can imagine like most of the time, any project you work on, you're going to be using like a third-party API for some kind of service. And with that, that's where your integration test would come in. What you normally do to get around this when you're writing your unit tests, or if you're writing a test that you don't necessarily want to test the full flow, you would create mocks for these integrations. But if you want to test that API call actually comes back with the right stuff and all that stuff, that's where the integration test would come into play. Regression tests is another category, which basically is what I would consider like what you do is just maintenance of a product. The current client that I work on, we have kind of a regression testing suite that we run whenever, we just started writing it. We manually did a huge number of tests, and now we're getting to the point where we're trying to automate it. And so the idea is that with regression tests, whenever you make a change, you would run your regression test to make sure that your change didn't break something else. End-to-end tests, which is kind of what Luke was talking about in the beginning, is essentially the last category other than the production tests like we were just talking about with LogRocket. But end-to-end testing is basically just the full flow. So you're testing your front and your back end, making sure everything looks okay. You could kind of say that this is kind of integration testing, but I would say end-to-end testing is like, especially with like a front-end application, is basically just making sure that the application literally like behaves the way that you would expect a user, to interact with it. There's two different big tools that you see with end-to-end testing. There's Selenium WebDriver, which is a little bit older and has a lot of support across, various languages. And then you have Cypress. Cypress is kind of newer and it has a little bit better developer experience, in my opinion, which is why I use it on my clients and why I'm kind of a fan. There's also, I should say that there are many testing frameworks out there that are smaller, which I'm sure like somebody's going to say something about. But these are the two most prominent ones that you see if you just Google end-to-end testing frameworks. So because of that, that's why I'm focusing on Cypress. Because like I said, it's to me the best, and it's a really easy way for you to see kind of how this works. All right, so now we can do the demo. So let me hit the escape button, and these are the links to the articles I'm going to talk about. All right, so the app, let me go ahead and just try to spin it up. So the app that we're going to be playing with is, like I said, it's a meal planning app. So like you log in. Once you're in, you can have, your meal. If you hit edit, say like I wanted to say I ate toast. Toast for breakfast. Let's say like I did soup for lunch, and then we'll say I did steak for dinner. If I hit save, that's what you have for that day. And the idea would be that you would do this for every day of the week, and you can plan your meals. It's just a fun toy project. Not a whole lot to this. The biggest thing is kind of like this edit save flow, where I'm basically, if you click on edit, it unlocks these fields so you can take in inputs. But there really just isn't a whole lot of complication to this app, which is why it makes it a good one for examples. So the first thing that I'll show you in the code is this is the source code for the project. Basically, these are very traditional like functional components with React. I've got like a home page. There's a button here. If you click on it for login, it takes you to the meals page. Meals page is basically what you just saw me interacting with, where I'm entering the data and saving the meals for each day. Not a whole lot to this. When we're talking about unit tests and unit testing with Jest, the first example would be that you can, let me see if I can get a header test. So this is very simple. This is basically the one that I showed in the slides. So basically I'm running the app or creating a div to like essentially have a like just do a test against. So it's like kind of like a pseudo DOM or just a very light DOM. Then basically what I do is I render the component and then I make sure that the title is what it is. This is super simple, and this is very typical of what you would see if you had like a unit testing suite, or you were trying to test or have like some tests that you want to run all the time to make sure things aren't broken. We have the title test, which is basically the same thing. We're rendering a title component, making sure it's just a chow chow. We have a weekday test. So this one is where it will show the weekdays correctly. So make sure that it's got the content within our container. We're also saying that we're checking to see if it saves weekday meals correctly. So basically here, what we're doing is we have created like kind of a mock or just like a mock instance of a function that we're going to invoke. And basically you can then use that. If I go to save meal, where is it? Oh, here it is. Okay. You pass that into the component. So a couple of concepts here. Basically, we're creating a mock value because this is actually, we should invoke like an API call. And we don't want to do that because we just want to test the component itself. We want to make sure that our code is behaving in this component the way it's supposed to. So we're just creating this mock. We're going to pass that into the weekday component here, and then we can begin to do stuff with it. This is using the React testing library and Jest. So what happens with React testing, the React testing library and Jest, is that they have things like fire event. There's also a thing called a screen object. These are all basically helpers that when you call the render function right here in your test, it uses these to interact with the pseudo thing that you've generated. When you're running unit tests, you're not actually running your app. So you're not running like the full project. You're just running like this piece. And so what Jest is letting us do is basically create a smaller instance of a part of your project. And then that's why, we have to orchestrate it up here. And then we actually like do the, whatever we're trying to do. This test is basically testing the edit save flow that I showed a second ago, where basically I've got, I'm showing a set of meals, you click edit. We're going to make sure that initially it's disabled. And then once you hit save, it should have again the attribute of disabled. And I've written like a couple of comments here where you say like ed button should not be disabled, save button should not be enabled. But basically this is all just testing that very simple little interaction I did a second ago, where I just edited those fields, hit save, and then they were locked again. The last one with this. The last thing that I'll say with this is that the React testing library and like Jest are great tools if you want to use these for your unit tests in your project. React has a very strong set of documentation that basically gives you what they call recipes. And these are basically just like patterns that you can use across your project for your tests. And again, this is, if you notice, we have like arrange, which we're set up, act, where we're actually doing the act, and they have a helper function called act that will invoke your project. And then we have like assert, which is where we could go and check out events and these kind of things. And then there's all kinds of other stuff that's also available, where if you do like snapshot testing, this is basically a shot in time of what your project will look like, and then you can compare it against it in the future. There's a whole thing to that I'm not really going to dive into because I think that's a little more further than what we want to do for this meetup, but it's there and it's a really cool tool if you ever wanted to look into it. So before I show you Cypress, I'm just going to show you what the unit tests actually look like. So I showed you what the tests were when I ran them. So what you would do here is if I just say run unit test, you'll notice in my terminal, I can get the terminal up here, it goes and we're saying npm test watch all false, and we're making it verbose. So that means that we're trying to show the output of the test. If you notice right here, these are the tests that I was just showing you. I have one for errors, I have title, I have a header, I have like a general one that makes sure the app actually could render in total. And then I have like the weekday test, which is the thing that was testing the edit and save functionality I was just showing a minute ago. As soon as you run this in the terminal, you get this nice little output, and then you can understand like what was passed and how many were ran. You can also do a lot of stuff with like Jest has code coverage tools. Usually there's a lot of stuff if you Google that, but basically you add like either an additional like MVN package, or there's settings in just the basic Jest commands that will allow you to create a little report, and then it can show you line by line what test is covered. So that can be really helpful if you're trying to go for what people consider like 100% test coverage, where every line of your project is covered in some kind of test. A lot of different opinions about that. My opinion is that I think the functionality of your project is the most important thing, but I totally understand the idea of trying to go for completeness. So with that, let's go ahead and start talking about Cypress. So Cypress is like not, I mean, it would take like, you could talk about this for like an hour, but basically Cypress is a tool that it runs alongside your project. And what you can do is it basically will invoke, different behaviors. So like it basically, this is the runner itself. And then when I run these tests, like if I hit meal spec right here, this is an emulated version of Chrome. And what Chrome is what it's going to do now is it's going to try to run the code like, in this like emulated version, and it's going to make sure things are there. So if you see like right here, I'm asserting that expecting this object to contain Jesse Chow Chow. I'm getting an object and passing a click event to it. I've got at the end, I'm making sure that the thing that I put in here has the word chicken in it. So like this is all kind of like the verbose output of the tests. And then but the idea here again is that Cypress is an end-to-end testing tool. And so the idea with this is that you would write your tests with the idea of actually running your code for either for real, or you can inject mock values. Cypress is very flexible. So it depends on like what your team wants. I was on a team, or actually the team I'm on right now, our original implementations were completely using mock values. So we could run our test suite without necessarily our backend APIs needing to be working. But we changed that because we wanted to actually exercise the backend APIs and the front end whenever we ran our tests. So now we're actually invoking, the direct API calls, and we got rid of the mocking features. All those things are parts of Cypress that are well documented and very powerful. The Cypress tests themselves, basically, when you add Cypress to your project, this folder, which you see right here, gets added. And then inside the Cypress folder, you have subfolders where you have fixtures, which is basically this would be like a mock value, like I was just talking about. You have integration, and these are where your actual, what I would consider like a test is actually written. And then you have things like commands right here. And there's a set of plugins you could also install. But the commands, it's an effort to create boilerplate or remove boilerplate from your code. So you can think about like, if your app has a login that requires like 4 or 5 steps, you would create a command for login, just as like this example right here. And then in your test, you could just call it directly, and you wouldn't have to rewrite that test or that block of code in each test. So that's kind of like what commands are for. But for all intents and purposes, the thing that you're probably going to spend the most of your time with Cypress is right here in the integration, where you just have basically very similar to what I showed you with Jest. So you still have like you use the Sci object. So that's basically the test runner itself. You're visiting like the default route. I'm getting this button and I'm passing a click event to it. If you notice, these are what are called XPath queries. It's kind of like an older thing, but you can use test IDs. The project that I use right now with my main client, most of this is test IDs. So you end up with things, I don't think I actually have, there it is. There's one right here. So you have stuff like this where you're looking for like a test ID. So then you don't have to go through and do all this kind of stuff. But basically what we have here is, we get the button, pass the click event, making sure that the value is shown on the screen. We can also click other things. So like we get the Sunday object, make sure that the fields are cleared. Then we can enter, values. But all of this is all being done kind of orchestrated through this. And then it's like, that's what you see right here. The other cool part is that with this, you could run it in CI. So you can actually have a headless version of this that generates a report. And that can be really helpful if you're trying to show stuff to a product owner, or you need some kind of like a way to document your project. If you notice also, as I'm moving my mouse around this, what you see here in your emulated browser changes. So what that is basically, this is time travel. So so this is like what your app looks like literally at that step, which can be really helpful if a test fails, or if you need to like try to figure something out. And you still have, since it's an emulated browser, you still have access to a traditional like console. You can look in the source code. This is all the same stuff that you're familiar with Chrome DevTools. It's all still right there. The other thing is that when you're writing your tests, like this looks a little bit daunting because you're like, how do you know that that's what an XPath query is? So what you do is you click right here to select your playground, and then let's say like I want just this field right here. This is writing all the code for you, and then if you hit copy, I'm not going to save this, but I will show this to you. It will. Oops, there it is. It writes the query. So they try to help you a little bit, and so you kind of have this nice like back and forth experience where you'll write a little bit of a test it out, come back, and kind of have this testing loop that you're writing it in. The other thing is that what my one of my good friends that I work with, he actually just showed me the other day another thing that I didn't talk about in my blog post, but I think is really cool, is Cypress Studio. So if you type in Cypress Studio, you can go out here and check this out. But what this does is this takes all of the Cypress tests and takes it to like the next level, because basically it will write the code for you. So you can essentially interact with your application, and then what it will come down and it will generate this. And then you can use that as a end-to-end suite. Obviously, you're going to have to tweak this a little bit because you're going to need to there'll be some kind of behavior or something, but the idea is that this kind of takes some of the legwork out of it, so it makes writing end-to-end tests easier. So this was a really cool like kind of feature that I just found out about that I wanted to share. So with that, I'm sure there's questions, and I can pass this back over to Luke and everyone else, and I'll open it up for questions.
Sweet, thanks. I was going to ask, like, just writing those is such a lift generally, and maintaining them. I guess like being able to auto generate does really help. And yeah, now I think we need a Cypress integration. But I guess my question is like, when you're working, you've got a project or new feature going out, like how do you kind of scope the work going into testing relative to like core functionality, and like how do you bake that in to like the process?
Yeah. So basically, like, there's a lot of different schools of thought on like this kind of stuff. Normally, like if it's a greenfield project, you're just starting out, you're at it, you're building features, maybe you're doing like an agile workflow. What we would normally do is like, as you build a feature, you would build a test for that feature, right? And so then eventually, like over time, you build this like big mega suite. Most of the time, the experience I've had with clients is that they don't write tests at all, or they don't understand like how testing can help them. And so what I've done before is basically started kind of like a culture change, where whenever you solve a bug or you create a new feature, you write a test. And so the idea being that over the course of the life of your application, you'll eventually build that nice robust set of tests, but you won't have to do it all at once, and so those are kind of like the two different things that I've seen. But as far as like scoping of the work, normally we just add, we use like the Fibonacci sequence and all that kind of stuff for our agile ceremonies. But basically we just add a couple points for tests whenever we do something. So like if you're expecting like a 5, we would make it like a 7 or whatever the Fibonacci number is. And,
yep.
you just kind of like, and then the nice part is that both of these things, Jest and Cypress, are pretty reliable. So it's not like you're having to spend a lot of time like fixing stuff in production, or like, having a test suite that just like it's stopping your pipeline or something. I've had a really good experience with both of these.
Awesome. What's your opinion of test-driven development?
So I don't do it. So I think that it's really cool, and like I'm sure there's people that love it, and I see the value. Like I've watched the Uncle Bob videos, and like I've done the whole thing. But like to me, I think that the hard part with test-driven development is that like if you're going to architect an application like ahead of time, that becomes like more difficult, because then you kind of have this like thing where you're like, I need to accomplish this, and then just do what you need to accomplish it. And then all of a sudden you're like, that could have been architected better, I guess, if that makes sense. So my personal opinion is that like, I'm not a huge fan, but I see the value. And so if I was ever on a team that it did it, I would totally support, doing that with tests.
Awesome. I think there was maybe another question just came through. Is there any hint to reduce the effort to cover heavy systems with Cypress? Let's say an ERP, like too many forms and screens. Tried several times to code with end to end, but the efforts were always way too much. Therefore, now it's just unit tests and stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I can talk about that for a second. So basically the situation there, I think, would be that like, you have like a pipeline set up, and maybe like the different, say it's like a Jenkins pipeline. And like, as you're running your build job, you have like a runner, the runner only has like a certain amount of memory. And then when you run your tests, it's kind of the same thing. And so then what could potentially happen is, since you're running like this test runner right alongside your app, it might like overload everything. Or if it's just like you have a bunch of like points where you're calling an API, like in my client right now, we have one flow that literally every button click results in an API call. And so it's like in the test that we wrote for that, it was like you would have to click the button, and then we actually had to use a wait, because like Cypress does support like having a wait, and we would have to wait for the API to like come back. Anyway, that's kind of like what I'm imagining is happening here. And to that, I would say that one, like Cypress has, like I haven't dove into it very heavily, but there's a paid version of Cypress that has a lot of like features that do like parallelization. They can break like work units and all kinds. There's a lot of like kind of science that went into that. The other thing is that like, I think at the end of the day, you have to do whatever works best for you and your team. So if it makes more sense just to use, Jest tests, you can do it. You can do most of what I was just doing with Cypress with Jest. It's just a matter of using the like helper library values, and then like trying to, inject the content as you're writing your test.
Yeah, there's another question that just came through. I think you partially answered. Like, there's just like invisible failed Cypress tests. Definitely like adding more awaits all over the place. I've seen actually helps, but any other kind of like, they'll go fail on GitHub Actions or something. Any other kind of pointers in terms of like preventing failed runs?
Yeah. So what we did, I don't know if this is necessarily best practice, but there's a way you can actually allow anything to happen, like you'll allow the test to basically complete even if it fails. It's Cypress on event or something like that. Like it's something you have to do at the very beginning of your test. So you basically tell the runner that like, if you see an exception, proceed on. The problem with that is that if anything fails, it still moves forward. So like, you're kind of at that point, like, going Wild West with your code. But like at the same time, that might work. So the reason that we use it on my client is because we use a service that basically logs like behavior, so that we can then go look at it later. And the problem is that the API calls for that logging service don't work locally. They only work in like a hosted instance. And so whenever we would run these tests locally, they would fail. And so that's not necessarily, I guess, entirely true, because I have seen some of them pass, but I've seen a lot of them fail. And the point is that like, that shouldn't stop you from being able to write test. So turning this setting on where it like allows the test to continue even if you fail, I can bypass those. But then the onus is on us to be more stringent about what we test with assertions. So like, you have to like, you're kind of invoking your own, it's more like a, what is it, like innocent till proven guilty, guilty till proven innocent kind of like, thing. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like, yeah, kind of a similar question, like accounting for like incremental updates to like components and stuff. Should tests fail if they haven't been updated when you've actually made code changes, or like written in a way that they continue, which I think you just covered a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that your test library is just like the rest, anything else that you use, like when you maintain your project. So I would say that like as you're writing new code, you should be writing tests that kind of cover that. And then, I mean, ideally, you should be able, when you make a change, you shouldn't break other things. So ideally, like the idea would be you'd make your change, you run the existing suite, and everything would be okay.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but again, if you're changing stuff, you're probably going to have to change a test too, so that, so it's kind of hand in hand. So I would just say like, it's coming back to kind of the scoping question talking about a minute ago. It's like, whenever you do stuff, I mean, a lot of times we do like stuff as kind of tech debt. So we've definitely gone through periods where we just like don't have time to do this. And so we just push the code out, then we come back as like a tech debt cleanup and add tests to cover, what we've been doing. So it's very, very fluid as to, each team.
Yeah. His question around scoping and stuff like was actually more about just the man hours to cover the tests. I think we hit that a lot.
I mean, I think I was gonna say that the Cypress Studio definitely like is, I haven't used it yet, but I'm assuming that's going to like drastically reduce the number of hours because it's actually writing the test for you. Yeah. But I would say that the other thing is that it's very, once you get up and running, it's very easy to write tests. And I say that like because I've done this for a while, but the workflow is very simple to kind of follow. And my experience has always been like, I guess getting everything set up might take a day. And then from there, it's like actually at writing, your test suite, and that takes time. But like, I would say that the learning curve is pretty low, and they do a really good job with like tutorials, and their documentation is pretty robust. So I've had quite a good experience with that as well.
Nice. I was going to say like just moving everything to like super reusable components, and then abstracting our tests like to not be about the component, but each part of that, and then reusing them a lot has been easier to just like, we don't have to write new ones if we're just reusing the same stuff. So that's been helpful.
Yeah, and it's cool because like the workflow lets you do that. Like it lets you see like how you could make the code reusable or like, more modular, which I've always thought was kind of fun.
Yeah. All right. A couple more. These are great questions, everyone. So yeah, when we're devising tests, do you follow how users experience a certain screen page, or you try to cover the actual implementation, which I guess is meaning like more like what you think you're building rather than how people are using it, and which is why like LogRocket's super important here.
Yeah. So basically the answer is I do both, or that's what I try to do. Well, I mean, obviously when you're writing code, you kind of have this mental image of how the user is going to use it. So like with no user input, you kind of have essentially a behavior already defined. Then when the users are using it, you realize that they're like clicking around, maybe they might be like doing a shortcut. But we had a situation, like I can tell a real life story. Our client had a situation where basically they get notifications, and the notification has a URL in it. So like, you get it on your phone or whatever, you click it on your phone and then it would open the web page, right? The problem we had was that when they did that, it actually, in order to get to that screen, you actually had to go through like two other screens. Like you logged in and then you had to like click, it wasn't really any data, but it was like a kind of a flow. So what we had to do was we had to make it so that they would force them to go log in and then go to the place they were trying to go. So that was like a code thing all by itself. Once I did that code change, I then wrote a test that basically went directly to the URL, entered the login credentials, and then, and now that's part of our suite because that's like one of the ways that the users are doing stuff.
Does that like leverage like Puppeteer, like headless, for like actually persisting cookies and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the deep like the innards of Cypress, I'm still like kind of learning about myself. But
Yeah.
I think I think in general, like it's an emulated version of Chrome. So it's like anything that you're familiar with Chrome, it's actually doing. So and you can also do it's cool because they support Firefox, Chrome, and Chromium. And I think I think they were doing something with Edge, or they were trying to get to that point. So you can actually change the runner to use, some of the browsers. It's not all of them. The argument that everybody always has is that Selenium WebDriver is better because it supports any browser versus like Cypress, which only supports these like specific set. But the argument that I've always had in that case was most of our users use Chrome. So it's like, that's the most common use case, and that's what we go for. So
And yeah, someone just asked like handling Safari.
oh
And, like,
yeah.
I still have Opera people on some of our stuff, and like so that's where like you do like LogRocket I think does step in here is like you basically write tests, write the same test, you just create the metric in LogRocket, and you actually get the test for every person actually experiencing it. It's like if you're trying to confirm a like component rendered, you write the test passes, ship it to production, people are still complaining about it, like LogRocket will actually show, like prove to you that it actually really rendered for that person with Safari version from 2017 that no longer works anywhere else. So that's next month. I will have that part done. I want to see how this one went first, but and the same with visual testing. I don't think Cypress has that, does it?
Not really. They do have, I'm glad that they mentioned it though, because there is screenshots and videos. So you can set it up so that when you run your tests, it'll do a video of the test that ran, and then you can share it with like your team, or you can document. And it's also really helpful if the tests fail, because then you have a video of it failing, and then you can like, go back. So
Awesome.
yeah, Death IE6. Woohoo!
Hell on earth. All right, this was really good. Like I'm pumped about this. We're gonna make some updates. Maybe we'll focus a little bit more on one of these next month, but this is gonna happen for as long as Andrew wants to join us. So yeah, go to the blog, LogRocket blog, and just the meetups tab. You can sign up for next month's, and I'm going to email out the recording and everything. And if you want to cover something in particular next month, let me know and we will prep for it. Otherwise, thanks, Andrew. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, I'm gonna paste the links to the pages I was just showing you in the chat too. So there you go. Sorry, they're all like glued together, but if you copy those, then I can if you want to put that as part of like the post for this, I can send that to you separately, Luke, also.
Cool. Yeah, we'll do.
Okay.
Sweet. See you all later.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.